Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alpstead, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football. Talking about the NFL Combine and everyone, and you and I have been talking about this as far as identifying players that can be interior pass rushers for the Seahawks. We moved on from Reed last year, didn't really have a great replacement. I'm thinking a really nice interior pass rusher would be optimal with that first pick. And I'm looking for a guy now at the Combine that could really kind of fill that role. Obviously, I think when we did the mock draft, we settled in on kind of a rush linebacker kind of a guy as being in that pick, and that would work too. What is your ideal situation, kind of type of player that you're looking for the Seahawks in this Combine?
Okay, so the guy that I want to see just have nobody talking about him at all at the Combine so that he drops to Seattle would be Perrion Winfrey out of Oklahoma. He's a guy that I think he was the guy that you and I talked about when we did our most recent mock draft show, where we wanted him. We thought for sure he was going to be available in the early 50s. So he moved down a couple of times and then he got sniped from us. And we shouldn't have moved down.
Is there any way that you would consider the other three guys that are in this range, maybe earlier, but maybe right there would be Devonte Wyatt out of Georgia, Logan Hall out of Houston, or Phidarian Mathis from Alabama, all similar roles in the NFL, different types of players, different energies, different body types and builds and so forth. Perrion Winfrey seems to be the perfect fit as far as, being in that 3-tech role. But if they move to a 3-4 defense on a lot of fronts or a bare front or whatever, does Perrion Winfrey still fit that mold?
I think he does. You could have him if they go to almost a pure 3-4, he would be your 5-tech, and that would be a tremendous get for them there. Devonte Wyatt is a guy I'd be interested in to be the 3-tech in that particular scenario. Same with Logan Hall. I think he could do that too. Phidarian Mathis, he's Alabama, and I think you'll end up paying an SEC tax for him, and he'll go higher than his production in the pros, I think, will warrant. And so I'd stay clear of him unless he drops into the 60s. But he's, good player. I just think you're going to have to take him earlier than I would in order to get him, simply because people see Alabama and instantly like, okay, well, let's go get that guy because we know we can play. Whereas a guy like Travis Jones out of UConn,
let's talk about nose tackles.
15 or 20 picks later, you could stick him at nose tackle, move Poona Ford to the 3-tech, and maybe get just as much production out of your defense. Just as make your defense to be just as improved, but you get to pick him a round later.
Yeah,
by making that switch.
That's right. And so if you end up getting an offensive tackle that falls, for whatever reason, or if you get another position player that you just have to go up and get or whatever, you could do that. Now, I was going to talk to you actually about Poona Ford taking a role of a nose tackle in Seattle's new scheme, and wondering if he could hold up there. We also have Brian Monet as a restricted guy this year. Are those two players adequate?
Is Monet restricted, or is he exclusive rights?
He might. Yes, I believe that he might be exclusive, but
okay. It's a different question, because exclusive rights means he's coming in at 480,000.
Yes, I agree. Nonetheless, I think he'll be around. But what my question is he good enough to be the guy in Seattle's defense, considering the improvement. Now we know that they've defended the run pretty well. He was part of that equation, but we really know that they want to be more aggressive. And is Brian Monet that guy?
No, he's not. He's a guy that he's a giant human who takes up a ton of space and makes it hard to form running lanes for running backs on the inside. And that's what he does. And yeah, he's got some highlight reel where he gets upfield and gets pressure on the quarterback, but those plays are few and far between. That's just not who he is. And so they need a guy that can, if he's not going to be that guy, then they need to replace him with someone. And it's perfectly adequate rotational piece, guy that can come in at nose or the 3, do the job, give guys like Pinafort a break, but expecting him to come in and be a starter on an NFL defense, I think is really limiting you, because you've got a guy that's very one-dimensional. He's very much a run stuffer and doesn't do anything else.
Right. Well, I was just thinking in terms of just the nose tackle role. In a new scheme, if we were doing basically a traditional 3-4, and I don't know what we're doing, they haven't really come out and said that, but if we're going to be in those fronts more often, it could happen. A guy like Travis Jones would be perfect in that role, or Fedarian Mathis, for example, would be as well. If you like him as a prospect, Haskell Garrett again I
think you could get Travis Jones around later than Fedarian Mathis and get just as much out of him.
I think so. Yeah, I agree.
Haskell Garrett out of Ohio State is a guy that I would look at really closely if they're making that switch, because having him come in to pair with, Poona Ford, you've got a couple of guys that I think would be a really good interior of your defense, and you could get Haskell Garrett 2 rounds later. Yeah. That's just and
if you were going nice around later than that, it'd be like a guy like John Ridgeway from the Razorbacks, Arkansas. He's a guy in there that just basically stuffs the run, and if we need a guy like that, you don't want to go too much earlier than, say, round 5. How about defensive end, Keith?
Well, okay, so defensive end, and basically we're talking edge players. I have a hard time with this group because I don't know the scheme that Seattle's going to run, and this is the most scheme-specific group when it comes to that front 7. Because if you are looking at running more of a 3-4, then you can have smaller, faster guys as your edge players. And if you're looking at running something that's more traditional to hate allergy season, that's running, more of a traditional 4-3, well, then you need bigger guys who can be edge setters.
Woohoo!
Sorry about that, everybody.
Let it go, Keith.
So I have a real hard time with this particular group of guys and evaluating what Seattle needs.
I think the safe evaluation pick would be a 5-tech. So you'd look at guys like Trayvon Walker, Boy Mafe. Might be a little small for that position, but you know what I'm saying. Those kind of guys that could play strong side linebacker or move up. There's that, and then you've got the edge setters, the 5-techs. Guys like Josh Paschal out of University of Kentucky would be a guy that I'm looking at in this draft for sure. D'Angelo Malone is small, but he's quick. So you've got 2 different types. You've got the really quick guys, the small guys that they're going to be looking at that are specialists, and then you're going to be looking at their base defensive ends in a 3-4. So
maybe a guy like Isaiah Thomas out of Oklahoma,
Zachary Carter, Florida.
So I have a hard time evaluating this particular group for Seattle right now because I just don't know what they're looking for.
That's why I think that like the press conference thing, it will be interesting to see if you can get anything out of that as far as scheme is concerned. Now you don't have to necessarily tell the world who you're evaluating, but it'd be nice for fans to know what kind of defense they're going to run, just as a basic question and answer. I don't know. Maybe they don't want to divulge that yet. That would be kind of weird because I don't know. I guess you could say that our somebody could start scheming against us now. But I think,
but what they wouldn't want to say is, because if they're going to say, hey, we're switching to a 3-4, that's what we're going to run. Teams are going to go through and they're like, okay, so that means they need some smaller, quicker edge guys and some big defensive ends. And then they could start looking and go, okay, so that means that they're going to be after, Drake Jackson and Kinsley and Igbare. And then when it comes time for draft day, they could move up ahead of Seattle to get those guys if that's who Seattle's targeting. So you don't want to give those hints away. Right now, the fact that nobody knows except for the people that are in the Seahawks headquarters know what Seattle's looking for at this position is an advantage for Seattle going into draft day, because people aren't going to be able to scheme. And I don't mean scheme like on the field. I mean scheme on draft day, when to move, where to move in order to get their guy.
So another group that's going to be really athletic this year at the draft is the linebackers.
Yeah.
And that's another group, you just talked about scheme fits and not exactly knowing what's going on. This is a little bit of that as well.
Yeah, but the thing is, when it comes to linebacker, what you're looking at here, I mean, the Seahawks have Jordan Brooks. They've currently got Bobby Wagner, whether that is still true or not come draft day. But you need those two interior linebackers in a 3-4, and it's your middle linebacker and your weak side linebacker in Seattle's old scheme. You still need two guys, and what you're looking for is very similar with both of them. And so I think you can actually kind of look at what this team needs and what they're looking for, and go and find guys that are in that right range. And a guy like Channing Tindall out of Georgia, who's got, that 3rd round range, makes a lot of sense. That's a lot. Yeah. And they, the Seahawks have talked about wanting to get faster. And like I said, there's the speed right there, and you stick him at your weak side linebacker, move Brooks into the middle. If Bobby Wagner leaves, that's speed for days at linebacker. You couldn't go wrong with that.
Yeah. Leo Chanel is another guy that's got a lot of speed. Nick Bonito out of Oklahoma would be another guy. Chad Muma had a great Senior Bowl. Brian Asamoah, we've talked about that.
Yeah, Asamoah would be fun.
Yeah, Quay Walker is another guy that can move around for you. Who was the other guy I was thinking about? Troy Anderson's a tackling machine, kind of a middle linebacker type. If they're going to create a hedge
out of Montana State
this year for Bobby Wagner, bringing in another middle linebacker that could play special teams right away. So I think that they would be considering or looking at that. Zacoby McClain out of Auburn. Anyway, fun group. That'll be a fun group to watch.
So let's look at cornerback, because Seattle desperately needs cornerbacks.
Yeah. What's the situation right now on the roster, Keith, as you frame it?
I would say they have no healthy cornerbacks currently under contract.
They have nothing, literally
nothing. There's one player who's currently under contract, and he's coming off a patellar tendon injury. And so they have. But
we know that the team traditionally has not looked high in the draft to solve this equation.
The earliest they've taken a player in the draft in the Pete Carroll era has been Quill Griffin in round 3. That's it. Everyone else has been.
I have a question for you. So now that we have Desai, now that we have Carl Scott, now that we have maybe a new scheme where we're running a slightly different coverages and we're looking maybe for a cover guy, would you consider the first pick in the draft at 41, if somebody fell, they could do that for you, like a Kiara Elam out of Florida or something like that, or a Kyler Gordon, Washington, or Martin Emerson, I think is underrated out of Mississippi State. He might be available with the second pick. But what I'm saying is, would you consider drafting early based on those variables now?
Absolutely. I would say the fact that they don't have anything, and so it's not just a matter of you need to go get a guy that can play. You need to go get a guy that can start week 1. And that's hard to do. And so, and the fact that you're looking, I was gonna say, and the other thing is that you might need guys that, because even if you bring back the restricted guys and you re-sign some of your things, you may need a completely different skill set because of your scheme change, and you need to go get a guy that fits that skill set. You may have to go earlier in the draft, and I think this might be the year they do.
Well, I think they probably try to solve this in free agency too. Now, did you see the quote Richard Sherman came out with the other day about who's the guy? The guy that used to be at New England, and he spent last year, I think, with the Panthers, and now he's going to be a free agent, being a scheme fit in Seattle.
Yeah.
I know we so many players in our brains.
I know we're looking at this year's draft and they're like, oh yeah.
I know everyone that's listening. I'm just, talking out loud here, but the one of the top corners available in free agency is going to be available, and likely could be he didn't have a great year. He
hasn't played well in a couple of years. So I think that, Richard Sherman said a lot of things recently, and I'm learning very quickly to listen to him less and less. So,
all right. So is there somebody that you have your eye on in this draft that you'd love to see at the combine turn out and be a good fit for the Seahawks?
Are you expecting me to say anyone other than Tariq Woolen?
I was hoping you'd say Tariq Woolen, because that would be a great fit. It just would, honestly, I just want to make sure that his draft stock, his big board kind of love fest, is not just because he's just got this whole physique thing, this height, weight, speed thing, but he can't really do the job. He needs to show up on tape, and I'm wondering,
here's what I want.
Will it all show at the combine?
I want him to roll an ankle the day before the combine and not be able to participate. Go through the interviews, do all that, but not have good measurables on him. So he drops and the Seahawks can get him in like the 4th round or the 5th round.
I would be happy to take him though at 74 or whatever.
Oh, me too. But I'm just saying, like,
he may not be available then.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, like, if that happens and then the Seahawks get the cornerback version of DK Metcalf on the roster, I'll just be giddy.
You know who a guy I think that underrated, under the radar guy that the Seahawks are going to definitely consider, he's going to be on their short list, nobody's talking about right now, is Josh Jobe out of Alabama. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is Carl Scott knows Josh Jobe very, very well.
Yes.
And if Carl Scott likes Josh Jobe is going to be the pick.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's just the way it's going to be, because he's familiar with the system. Mm-hmm. He can come right in, start right away, or have a heavy rotation right away. And he's Carl Scott's guy. That would be a pick that I would look at.
The other thing that you add out that I would look at and wait for much later in the draft would be Jalen Armour-Davis. Same thing, right? Out of Alabama, mm-hmm. Currently thought of as like a 6th round pick. Mm-hmm. Having him come in because he already knows the coach and that kind of stuff, I think would work really well for Seattle, because it's just one of those things. It's a comfort level. He comes in, already knows what the coach is looking for and that kind of stuff, and the coach knows exactly how to use the player to get the most out of him.
Yeah,
and that's the kind of situation where I think the Seahawks could get a lot out of that.
Interesting. How about safety? I know that the safety thing for the Seahawks is going to be up in the air as well. Diggs is hopefully going to be re-signed. I think he's definitely a priority from all reports, including Kandata and so forth, are saying that they're in negotiations as we speak to re-sign him. Mm-hmm. And but nonetheless, I think that the scheme points to the idea that a hybrid sort of safety would be on the radar for the Seahawks, or possibly a free safety.
Yeah,
because we've already got Ryan Neal and Adams, so it seems like strong safety is solved.
Yeah, and it is, and so the thing is that what we saw at the end of last year when they moved Amadi to free safety during, when everyone was hurt the last couple of games. And they really liked what they saw from Amadi. He played well there. They moved Diggs up to strong safety. And so that gave them the idea that, okay, we know he can cover, he can play in the slot, but he has also done it on the back end too. And so they've kind of got that. But I think one of the things that, kind of looking at the coaching tree that the Seahawks have tapped into, they want free safety, strong safety guys that can do both. That way they can rotate one down to the line of scrimmage and one back and mix things up for the opposing quarterback. And honestly, Blair would be the perfect guy for that if he could ever be healthy.
I agree.
Diggs is great in that role. We know he can do that. Ryan Neal actually is great in that role. He can do that. So where do you go if you're the Seahawks and you have these options? Is safety actually a need? Now, if they don't re-sign Diggs, then it's absolutely a need. They need to go get a player. But if they can re-sign Diggs, I think they're in really good shape at safety and probably aren't going to take anyone early.
I think regardless of Diggs, if they miss out on Diggs in free agency, they'll probably sign a guy in free agency and solve that before the draft. And then you'd be looking at guys that would come in and either compete or back end guys that would, learn the system.
Play special teams.
So a guy like Jalen Petrie, who performed extremely well at the Senior Bowl, probably one of my favorite players in the draft, is sitting there, on big boards right now at about 60. So that would be in the back end of the second round, third round, kind of a grade. Kirby Joseph, Ferone McKinley, Yusuf Corker, Leon O'Neal, Smoke Monday. These are all guys that I would really like to see at the combine, just as options, because I know it's going to be one of those things that we're possibly going to be talking about in April.
Yeah, it's hard because we at this point, the Seahawks could be looking at a guy like maybe Brian Cook out of Cincinnati in the third round, or if they re-sign Diggs, he's not even on their board really. They're looking, down at Yusuf Corker out of Kentucky in like the round 5 or round 6 instead. And so it's so variable. It's not like other positions where it's like, okay, maybe they move down 1 round and get a different guy, but you're not talking like moving down 3. But that's the state of where safety is. You either need that person to replace Diggs, or you need back of the roster, filler and special teams play and backup that's going to learn the system over a year or so before they are expected to do much on the defense. So it's very different.
I was just looking at going back to cornerback. I was just looking at Tariq Woolen's projected 40 time, and he's projected to run in the low 4.3s, Keith.
I know.
That's 6'4", 200, could be 210 pounds at the combine.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
6'4", 220, runs in like 4.33, and it's going to jump out of the building too.
It's hard not to fall in love with a prospect like that. It is. It's like, oh my gosh.
The one thing I would warn people listening, in terms of falling in love with guys like that, is Christian Sicoli. You remember him?
Yeah.
He was a defensive end out of Buffalo who was one of the best athletes the combine has ever seen, like in the history of the combine. Seattle drafted him, moved him to guard because everyone was like, he's undraftable as a defensive end based on his, technique and production and everything. Didn't work out. Didn't really have kind of the work ethic that they were looking for. Cut him. He landed on a couple of different teams trying to play defensive end instead of guard. Never became of anything. So just because a guy is a freaky athlete doesn't make them a good player.
So are you a Cade York or a Cameron Dicker guy?
Ooh, do I have to answer?
I don't even know if you can. I wasn't expecting that you could. I was talking about kickers because we're not really in the kicker market, but Josh Myers kind of had, sort of season and his cap numbers up there, and so if you release a guy like Myers We wouldn't be looking for a kicker. I'm just saying.
Not in the draft. It'd be an after drafting.
Right. Because you'd want somebody to come in and compete with. Yeah.
I'd say if you're looking at a guy after the draft, Cameron Dicker is probably the guy. I think he's got a little bit longer leg. Although York's more accurate. So take your pick.
I think York's going to get drafted.
I think he is. I think he's going to be a 7th round pick.
I do too. All right. Anything else? Anything? Any surprises that you're looking for? You would be surprised about something, or
I would be very surprised if the Seahawks drafted a long snapper. I'd be very surprised if any team ever in the history of the NFL drafts a long snapper.
Yeah. Tyler Ott. This is the yearly mention of Tyler Ott.
Yep, we're allowed to mention him like once in the offseason and once during the year. That's it.
Yeah. So he's so reasonable that you could, you toss a guy like Tyler Ott a minimum contract every 3 or 4 years, and he's happy as a long snapper. And so
he's really good at what he does.
And he's really good. I mean, he's so good that we don't have to talk about him, which is perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you like how good of a special teams player he is, or if he's in on tackles or anything. I just don't even notice him, and I'm not looking for him, and that's just perfectly okay with me. Surprise wise for me, I would be, surprised if a guy like Breece Hall ran into the high 4.4s or something like that. Here's a guy on tape, and everyone's talking about him being a 4.38 guy. If he comes in and runs slower, I wonder what that would do to his draft stock, considering he's a certain style of a player. There's certain guys on the big board prospects that are going to be there that could hurt themselves. And there's not a lot of players that are really going to help themselves, because there's, this is a pretty athletic group overall. And it's a deep group. So there's not, the draft isn't really top heavy. And right after, starting in right around the pick number 20 or 25 range, you really get into this deep pocket of value where there's a lot of players between say 30 and 100 that have equivalent value, and teams are really going to be kind of maybe waiting on some of these prospects. So prospects could fall in the draft a little bit and be available. Some players that are in the 100 range right now, you're expecting to go in the middle of the 3rd round, might come up and sneak into a pick 50 or 60 because teams value them more than you do. And it always happens, and I don't expect it to be any different. And this is part of the process when teams go to interview prospects and look at the medicals and all that kind of stuff. Things that we just aren't privy to all the time will come into play, and we won't really know why players fell or rose in the draft based on those things that teams evaluate, and we just don't hear about.
Yep.
All right. Anything else?
No, but that's 2 shows. We're at an hour and 10 minutes. So thanks for listening, everybody. That was a very long conversation by Bill and I, but I think going into the combine, it's good to have a bunch of names to look at. Yeah, and that's the point. That's the point, because everyone loves that kind of stuff. Everyone likes to hear a name that they haven't really studied before and looked at. And I know, when I was evaluating, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and just scouring everywhere, to find information about prospects. And now here we are, we just kind of spill these names out. We're throwing out. It's nice. It's convenient. So I hope everyone appreciates that a little bit. Anyway. All right. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. SeahawksPlaybook.com is your place for everything. You find us on your favorite podcast app and subscribe. YouTube. Need more subscriptions on there. So that'd be great. And share it to your friends and family. So until next time. Go Hawks. Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter.
Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.